Hello, boring dreamers. Today we are going to abandon the flickering, pathetic flame of the modern scented candle and master the ancient art of the 12-hour burn. We are going to dig into the mud, mix manure with coal dust, and engineer a piece of fuel so dense and stubborn that it will outlast the longest winter night. We often think of medieval fire as a roaring, crackling bonfire, but the truth is, a roaring fire is a waste of energy. The real secret to survival was the slow, sullen smolder of the infinity log. You probably won't survive this, mostly because your attention span has been ruined by the internet, and you lack the patience to watch a brick of peat burn for 3 days straight. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead and let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing the global map of insomniacs light up. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes, and the first thing you notice is the silence. The wind has stopped howling outside, which is good, but the rhythmic crackle that lulled you to sleep is also gone, which is very, very bad. You lie still under your heavy woolen blanket, testing the air with the tip of your nose. It is freezing. The air inside the cottage has dropped to match the temperature of the stone walls. You can see your breath puffing out in white clouds, dissipating into the dark rafters above. You curse softly. You committed the cardinal sin of medieval survival. You let the fire go out. You throw off the covers, a brutal moment of shock, and stumble across the cold, packed earth floor toward the hearth. You grab the iron poker and frantically dig through the pile of gray, feathery ash in the center of the room. You are looking for a cherry, a single glowing ember that might still be alive, hiding like a ruby in the dust. You dig. You stir. You blow gently, getting a face full of soot for your trouble. Nothing. The ash is cold. The heart of the house has stopped beating. In the modern world, if your heat goes out, you check the thermostat or call a repair guy. It's an inconvenience. Here, it is a catastrophe. Without that fire, you cannot cook your morning pottage. You cannot boil water to clean your tools. You cannot dry your wet boots. And, perhaps most importantly, you cannot see. It is 5 a.m., and your house is a black box. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that relighting a fire in the Middle Ages was incredibly difficult. Matches, those magical little sticks of phosphorus, won't be invented until the 1820s. You have a flint and steel, sure, but striking a spark into damp tinder with frozen fingers in the pitch black is a skill that takes 20 minutes of frustration. You aren't just cold. You are technically incompetent compared to your ancestors. You stare at the dead hearth and realize your mistake. You burned wood. Last night, you threw a nice, big armful of oak branches on the fire. It looked great. It roared. It threw warm, dancing light into the corners of the room. But wood is a flash fuel. It releases its energy rapidly. The cellulose breaks down, the gases vent, and poof, it's gone. It's the thermal equivalent of a sugar rush. It gives you a spike of heat and then crashes, leaving you freezing at 3 a.m. This brings us to a quirky, fringe tidbit, a fire borrower's walk of shame. Since relighting a fire with flint was so hard, the standard solution for a dead hearth was to borrow fire. You would have to take an iron pot or a hollowed-out fennel stalk, walk to your neighbor's house, knock on their door in the pre-dawn freezing dark, and ask for a scoop of live coals. In small villages, this was a massive social signal. A cold hearth implied you were lazy, disorganized, or a bad manager of your household resources. Walking through the village with a smoking pot was the medieval equivalent of having your credit card declined at the grocery store. Everyone knew you messed up. You don't want to walk to the neighbors. You want to fix this permanently. You need a fuel that doesn't just burn. You need a fuel that sleeps. You need something that burns slower than wood, hotter than straw, and lasts long enough to bridge the gap of death between bedtime and breakfast. You look at the pile of firewood in the corner. It's dwindling. The forest is miles away, and the lord of the manor has strict laws about who can chop down trees. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate, the wood scarcity thesis. For decades, historians argued that medieval Europe faced a catastrophic timber crisis that forced people to switch to coal and peat. They pictured a deforested wasteland. But recent scholarship suggests this was exaggerated. The forests were managed carefully. Coppicing. The switch to alternative fuels wasn't always because wood was gone, but because wood was valuable for building ships and houses. Burning good timber just to stay warm was seen as economically stupid, like burning your furniture to heat the room. The peasants didn't switch to peat because they were desperate. They switched because they were efficient. You realize that to survive the rest of the winter, you have to stop thinking like a modern camper who wants a pretty fire. You have to start thinking like a geologist. You need to find the fuel that the earth has been cooking for you for 10,000 years. You grab your cloak and your spade. You are leaving the forest behind. You are heading for the flat, wet, miserable-looking land at the edge of the village. You are going to the bog. You step out of the cold cottage into the even colder morning light. The forest looms on the horizon, dark and inviting. In your mind, that forest is full of fuel. You imagine dragging a fallen oak branch home, chopping it up, and enjoying a roaring blaze. But you stop. You look at the forest, and then you look at your neck. You like your neck attached to your shoulders. In the medieval world, the forest is not a public utility. It is a private factory owned by the lord. Every tree, every branch, and often every twig belongs to him. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that forest law was one of the most hated and strictly enforced legal codes in Europe. If you were caught cutting down a tree without permission, the penalties were severe. Fines were standard. Physical punishment, like cropping your ears, was possible. In extreme cases under the Norman kings, poaching the king's deer or destroying his vert greenery could get you blinded. You literally risked your eyesight for a bundle of kindling. So, burning logs in the modern sense split, seasoned hardwood is a luxury reserved for the Great Hall. The lord burns oak, the peasant burns whatever he can find that won't get him hanged. You turn your back on the trees. You look at the ground. You are entering the fuel crisis. Winter is a hungry beast. A small cottage fireplace consumes roughly 30 to 50 pounds of wood per day just to maintain a survival temperature. That's a small tree every week. Over a 4-month winter, you would need an entire grove. If every peasant in the village did that, the forest would vanish in a decade. So you have to scrounge. You have Estover rights, the right to gather deadwood, fallen branches, and maybe chop some undergrowth, gorse or broom. But deadwood burns fast. It's flash fuel. It's good for boiling a pot of soup quickly, but useless for heating the house all night. You need density. You need carbon that has been compressed. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit, the stick tax. In many English manors, there was a specific custom called chimney money, or smoke penny. You had to pay a tax just for the privilege of having a fire. But sometimes you could pay this tax in kind with chickens, eggs, or bundles of sticks. This created a perverse incentive. The peasants would gather the best, longest burning wood to pay their taxes, and keep the rotten, smoky, wet wood for themselves. You are literally burning the garbage to keep the taxman warm. You trudge along the muddy path. You are looking for something that isn't wood. You pass a field where the sheep are grazing. You look at the sheep. You look at the piles of droppings behind them. You shake your head. Sheep dung is too small. It burns hot and fast, but it smells terrible and requires gathering thousands of tiny pellets. You need something bigger. You pass the cow pasture. Now this is promising. Cow pats dry into large, fibrous discs. They burn slow. They burn surprisingly clean, smelling like herbal incense rather than poop. But you need those for fertilizer. If you burn all the manure, your crops will fail next summer. It's a zero-sum game between heat and food. You keep walking until the ground starts to squelch under your boots. The grass turns from green to a brownish yellow. The air smells acidic and sulfurous. You have arrived at the peat bog. This is the poor man's coal mine. It looks like a useless swamp. It's dangerous. If you step in the wrong spot, you can sink to your waist in black slime. But underneath that swaying moss lies a layer of ancient, compressed vegetation that is arguably the best slow fuel on Earth. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate, the peat revolution. Economic historians argue that the rise of the Dutch economy in the Golden Age, 17th century, wasn't just about ships and trade. It was about peat. The Netherlands had almost no forests, but they had massive peat bogs. They dug up millions of tons of this cheap fuel to power their brick kilns, breweries, and salt pans. While the English were panicking about running out of wood, the Dutch were burning their own dirt. You are about to tap into that same energy source. You heft your spade. It has a special Tula slane, or tusker, with a right-angled blade designed to cut perfect rectangular bricks out of the wet earth. You aren't just looking for heat. You are looking for time. A peat brick doesn't flame. It glows. It holds its heat for hours, pulsing with a steady red infrared radiation that penetrates stone walls better than a flickering wood fire. But there is a catch. You can't just dig it up and throw it on the fire. You look at the black, glistening mud on your spade. It is dripping wet. It is 90% water. If you threw this on your hearth now, it would hiss, stink, and put the fire out completely. You are realizing that the medieval fuel game isn't just about gathering. It's about processing. You are about to become a manufacturer. You have to turn this mud into a battery. You start to dig. The suction of the bog fights you. Squelch, suck. It is back-breaking work. You cut brick after brick, stacking them on the bank. They look like brownies made of crude oil. You are harvesting the result of 5,000 years of rot. You are burning the prehistoric past to survive the medieval present. And as you dig deeper, cutting into the lower layers of the bog, you hit something hard. Clunk. You freeze. Is it a rock? Is it a buried treasure chest? You scrape away the mud. It is wood, but not normal wood. It is black, heavy, and hard as iron. You have found bog oak, a tree that fell into the swamp thousands of years ago and has been preserved by the acidic anaerobic water. It hasn't rotted. It has mineralized. You have found the holy grail of the slow burn. This isn't just fuel. This is a geological artifact that will burn hotter than coal and last all night long. You pry it loose. It weighs a ton. You drag it up onto the bank, panting. You have the peat. You have the bog oak. But you still can't light a fire. Not yet. You have to defeat the enemy of combustion. Water. You stand at the edge of the bog, staring at the pile of black, glistening bricks you've just excavated. They look like heavy loaves of dark bread. They smell of earth and stagnation. You have the fuel, technically, but right now, you also have a pile of water. A fresh peat brick is roughly 90% water by weight. It is a sponge made of ancient moss. If you tried to burn it, you would just generate steam. To get heat out of this, you have to get the water out first. And this is where the timeline of medieval survival stretches out. You can't just go to the store and buy a bag of charcoal. You have to plan your winter heating in the spring. You pick up a sod. It's heavy, maybe 5 or 6 pounds. You stack it on a wooden barrow and wheel it to higher, drier ground. You begin to build a structure. This is the rickle or footing. You stack the wet bricks in loose, airy pyramids or walls, leaving gaps between them so the wind can whistle through. You are building a wind tunnel for mud. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit, the peat whistle. In some regions, the way you stacked your peat was a signature, almost like handwriting. A well-stacked peat wall would whistle in the wind as the air rushed through the gaps. If your stack didn't whistle, you packed it too tight. The peat wouldn't dry, and you would freeze in January. The sound of the wind in the peat was the sound of future warmth. You step back and look at your work. You have built a fortress of drying mud. Now you wait, and wait, and wait. It takes weeks, sometimes months, for peat to cure. You need the summer sun to bake the exterior, and the breeze to wick away the internal moisture. You are racing the clock. If the autumn rains come early and soak your stack before you get it under cover, the whole harvest is ruined. You will have a pile of mush fuel that simply won't burn. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that the energy density of dry peat is surprisingly high, about 13 to 20 megajoules per kilogram, which is comparable to high-quality wood and roughly half that of coal. But that energy is locked behind the drying process. The patience is the refining mechanism. You are trading time for thermal units. While the peat dries, you go back to that piece of bog oak you found. You wipe the slime off it. It is jet black. It looks like it was carved from obsidian. This wood is thousands of years old. It fell into the bog before the Ramang Empire existed, maybe before the pyramids were built. The tannins in the bog water have reacted with the iron in the wood, turning it black and incredibly hard. You can't chop this with a normal axe. It would chip the blade. You have to saw it or split it with iron wedges and a sledgehammer. But when you burn it, when you burn it. Bog oak doesn't burn like normal wood. Normal wood has volatile gases that flare up and consume the fuel quickly. Bog oak has lost most of its volatiles over the millennia. It burns almost purely as solid carbon. It burns like anthracite coal. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate, the smell of history. Archaeologists and historians often debate the sensory experience of the past. We know what it looked like, but what did it smell like? If you walked into a medieval cottage burning peat and bog oak, the smell would be distinct. It wouldn't smell like a campfire, hickory, pine. It would smell acrid, heavy, and earthy. It smells like burning soil. Some descriptions from travelers compare it to sulfur and hellfire, while locals called it the scent of home. The smell was so pervasive that it flavored the food, the clothes, and even the whiskey, which is why Scotch whiskey still tastes like peat smoke today. You drag the heavy chunk of bog oak to your cart. This is your Yule log candidate. This is the log you will save for the coldest night of the year. But you can't rely on finding ancient trees every day. You have your drying peat, but you need more. You need a way to stretch your fuel supply. You need to create volume out of nothing. You look at the pile of slack, the dust and crumbs of coal or charcoal that are too small to burn in a grate. They just fall through the bars and choke the fire. It's waste. You look at the cow manure in the pasture. Waste. You look at the clay soil by the river. Waste. You look at the straw chaff from the threshing floor. Waste. What if you combine them? You are about to engage in the ancient art of fuel briquetting. You are about to become a medieval chemist, mixing binding agents, poop, feral mass, clay, and combustibles, coal dust, to create a fireball that costs $0 and burns for half a day. You roll up your sleeves. It's time to get your hands dirty. Very, very dirty. You stand before your rickle of peat, your stack of bog oak, and your pile of scavenged green wood. You have done the hard labor. You have dug, chopped, and hauled until your back feels like it's made of rusty hinges. But you cannot rest. And you certainly cannot light a fire. You are now entering the most agonizing phase of medieval energy production, the seasoning. In the modern world, patience means waiting 3 minutes for your microwave burrito. In the medieval world, patience means staring at a log for 2 years before you're allowed to burn it. You pick up a piece of green wood, a branch you cut from a living tree or poached from the Lord's forest yesterday. It feels heavy. It feels cold. If you were to throw this on a fire right now, you wouldn't get heat. You would get a hiss. You would get smoke. You would get a tepid, sputtering flame that seems to actively hate you. Here is the thermodynamics of your failure. Latent heat of vaporization. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that freshly cut wood is roughly 50% water by weight. Half of that log is just tree juice. When you put that wet log on a fire, the fire cannot burn the wood fibers until it has boiled off all the water. Physics dictates that it takes a massive amount of energy to turn liquid water into steam, 2,260 kilojoules per kilogram, to be precise. So, your fire spends the first hour doing nothing but boiling water. It is sucking heat out of the room to dry the wood, rather than putting heat into the room to warm you. Burning green wood is technically a net negative thermal event in the short term. You are essentially trying to heat your house by boiling a kettle with no lid. So, you have to become a water manager. You look at your wood pile. It isn't just a heap. It is a meticulously engineered structure. You have split the logs to increase the surface area. You have stacked them bark side down, or up, depending on local superstition and rainfall patterns, to let the moisture wick out. You have placed them on old stones to keep them off the damp earth. You are building a wind tunnel. You need the air to flow through the stack, stripping away the moisture molecule by molecule. You tap 2 logs together. Thud. That is the sound of misery. That is the sound of wet wood. You want to hear a ring. A sharp, high-pitched clack like 2 billiard balls hitting. That tells you the cell structure is dry, the sap has crystallized or evaporated, and the wood is ready to release its solar energy. But getting to the ring takes time. For oak, it takes 2 years. For ash, maybe 1. For peat, it takes a summer. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit. The ash key exception. There is an old English rhyme that goes, "Ash new or ash old is fit for a queen with crown of gold." Ash wood is one of the only fuels that has a naturally low moisture content, around 30 to 35%, even when green. You can burn it fresh, and it will actually flame. If you find an ash tree, you have struck gold. It is the fast food of the forest. Everything else is slow food. But your peat is the trickiest of all. You check your rickles on the high ground. The wind is blowing through the gaps. The outer skin of the peat bricks is turning a dusty gray and hardening like stone. This is good. A skin protects the brick from light rain. But inside, the brick is still a soft, wet brownie. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate, the Little Ice Age feedback loop. We mentioned the cooling climate earlier. Historians and climatologists argue that the wet, cool summers of the 14th to 17th centuries created a disastrous energy feedback loop. Because it rained so much in July and August, the peasants' peat and wood never fully dried. This meant they had to burn damp fuel all winter. Damp fuel gives off less heat. Less heat means colder houses. Colder houses mean more sickness and calorie burning. It was a poverty trap driven by humidity. You weren't just cold because it was snowing. You were cold because your fuel was wet. You walk around your stacks, checking for the enemy. Mold. If you stack the peat too tight, or if the wood sits in a puddle, white fungal threads will start to consume your fuel. The fungus eats the cellulose. It literally eats your heat. A rotten log burns like a wet sponge. But there is a danger even greater than rot. There is the danger of the stack fighting back. You place your hand deep inside a large pile of half-dried hay or tightly packed peat. It feels ... hot, not warm from the sun, hot from the inside. This is spontaneous combustion. Inside the stack, billions of thermophilic bacteria are breaking down the organic matter. This fermentation generates heat. If the stack is too big and the airflow is too poor, the heat can't escape. The temperature rises 130 degrees, 160 degrees, 180 degrees. Eventually, the stack reaches the auto-ignition temperature. You could wake up in the middle of the night to find your winter fuel supply and your barn engulfed in flames without a spark ever touching it. It is a cruel irony. Wet fuel can cause a fire, but only when you don't want it to. So you have to turn the stack. You have to restack the peat. You are constantly moving tons of material just to keep it aired out. You are a nursemaid to a pile of dirt. You look at the sky. The clouds are gray. It's going to rain again. You rush to cover the stacks. You use old tarps made of greased canvas, or bundles of reeds, or even broad leaves. You are trying to put a raincoat on a pile of wood. This is the anxiety of the drying season. Every rainstorm is a thief. Every cloudy day is a setback. You watch the sun like a hawk, praying for wind, praying for heat. But let's say you succeed. Let's say the summer passes, and your peat is hard as a rock. Let's say your wood rings like a bell. You have the raw materials. You have the base load fuel. But you want something better. You want the long burn. You look at the pile of slack, the dust, the crumbs, the waste. You look at the pile of fresh cow manure by the barn. You look at the heavy clay soil by the riverbank. Individually, these things are useless. Coal dust chokes a fire. Manure burns too fast. Clay doesn't burn at all. But you remember the wisdom of your grandmother. You remember the recipe for the night log, the gathering coal, the backing turd. Medieval names were very literal. You realize that you can overcome the limitations of nature through chemistry. You can mix these ingredients together to create a composite fuel that defies the laws of normal combustion. You are about to play in the mud. You are going to take the useless leftovers of the farm, and you stand in the middle of the barnyard, staring at 3 piles of what most people would consider absolute garbage. To your left, a heap of black, gritty dust swept from the floor of the local blacksmith or the bottom of the coal cart. To your right, a mound of sticky, heavy clay dug from the riverbank. And in front of you, the piece de resistance, a fresh, steaming pile of cow manure. You are about to perform alchemy. You are going to turn this trinity of trash into gold, or, more accurately, into heat. You kick off your boots. Yes, you read that right. You can't mix this with a shovel. The suction is too great. You have to get in there. You have to feel the consistency with your toes. You step into the muck. Welcome to the art of making comb balls, or glaze, or backing turds, depending on how polite your village is. In the modern world, we buy charcoal briquettes that are perfectly shaped and soaked in lighter fluid. They are engineered for convenience. You are about to engineer a briquette for endurance. You start by shoveling the slack, the coal dust into the center. On its own, this dust is useless. If you threw a scoop of it onto a fire, it would smother the flames instantly, blocking the airflow like a wet blanket. It needs structure. It needs to be suspended in a matrix that allows oxygen to reach the carbon. That's where the cow comes in. You shovel the manure onto the coal dust. Roughly equal parts. Maybe a little more poop if the coal is very fine. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that cow manure is one of the most versatile chemical binders in history. It isn't just waste. It is processed, undigested fiber, cellulose, mixed with natural enzymes and proteins that act like glue. When it dries, it becomes hard, fibrous, and surprisingly durable. It doesn't crumble like dried mud. It holds together. Adobe bricks, wattle and daub walls, and even some pottery glazes rely on the binding power of dung. You are using the cow's digestive tract as your pre-processing factory. Now, you add the clay. This seems counterintuitive. Clay doesn't burn. In fact, clay is used to make fireproof bricks. Why would you add a fire retardant to your fuel? Because you don't want a fire. You want a glow. The clay acts as a thermal moderator. It dilutes the carbon. It absorbs the heat and radiates it back slowly, preventing the coal dust from burning away too fast. It turns your briquette from a flashbang grenade into a slow-release heat capsule. You start to stomp, squish, squelch, grind. You march in place, turning the mixture over and over. It turns into a uniform, grayish-black paste. It is heavy. It is sticky. It smells ... Well, it smells like a farm, but the coal dust actually helps neutralize the ammonia tang of the manure. You are essentially kneading a giant toxic dough. You are looking for a specific texture stiff enough to hold its shape, but wet enough to bind. If it cracks, add more poop. If it slumps, add more dust. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit, the dancing the calm tradition. In parts of Wales and southwest England, mixing this fuel was a community event. Neighbors would gather to help a family mix their winter store. They would take off their shoes, roll up their trousers, and stomp the mixture while singing specific rhythmic songs to keep the pace. It was a poop party. The friction of the coal dust acted as an exfoliant, so you ended the day with very dirty legs but incredibly smooth feet. Who needs a spa day when you have a manure pit? As you stomp, you are creating a composite material. The straw fibers in the manure provide tensile strength, like rebar. The clay provides thermal mass, like concrete. The coal dust provides the energy, like gasoline. But there is a darker side to this ingenious recycling. This leads to a fierce scholarly debate, a nutrient loop crisis. Agricultural historians argue that the burning of manure was a desperate act that locked medieval peasants into a cycle of poverty. Manure is the primary fertilizer for the fields. It contains the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that the wheat needs to grow. If you burn the manure to stay warm in the winter, you are robbing the soil of its food for the spring. Your crops yield less. You go hungry. You are weaker, so you can't chop as much wood, so you burn more manure. It is a soil versus hearth trade-off. In many regions, burning dung was prohibited by the Lord, not because of the smell, but because it destroyed the long-term value of the land. You are literally burning your future lunch to heat your present dinner. But right now, with the frost biting at your toes, you don't care about next year's wheat harvest. You care about not freezing tonight. You check the consistency. It's ready. It feels like heavy, wet clay. You step out of the pile, wiping your legs with straw. You now have a mound of raw energy potential, but you can't just leave it in a heap. You have to shape it. You grab a handful of the black muck. You squeeze it. You roll it between your palms like making a meatball or a snowball. You pack it tight, forcing out the air bubbles. You make a ball roughly the size of a grapefruit, or perhaps a small melon. These are your fireballs. They are dense, they are heavy, and when they dry, they will be hard as rocks. You realize the genius of this design. A log is a cylinder it rolls. It stacks awkwardly. A pile of loose coal chokes the airflow, but a sphere is perfect. When you pile these balls in the hearth, they naturally create gaps between them. The air can flow around every ball, feeding the fire evenly from all sides. The shape itself is an engineering feature. You mix and roll, mix and roll. It is monotonous work. Your hands are stained black. The carbon gets into the pores and stays there for days. Your back aches, but you know the math. One of these balls, once fully dried and banked with ash, can smolder for 4 hours. 3 of them, arranged in a pyramid, can last the entire night. You are manufacturing time. You look at your growing pyramid of black spheres. They are glistening wet. Just like the peat, they are useless right now. You stand before the south-facing wall of your cottage. It is a warm afternoon, the kind of rare, golden day in late summer that makes you forget the biting frost is only a few months away. Your hands are coated in the thick, black paste of the coal dust and manure mixture. Your feet are stained gray. You have the raw material. Now you need to bake it. You pick up one of the wet, heavy spheres you just rolled. It feels like a cannonball made of pudding. You walk up to the wall of your house. Splat. You throw it against the stone. Not hard enough to explode it, but hard enough to make it stick. You flatten it slightly with the palm of your hand, turning the sphere into a thick, convex disc. It clings to the rough masonry, defying gravity. You pick up another one. Splat. And another. Splat. To a modern observer, you are vandalizing your own home. You are covering the exterior of your house in literal excrement. But to you, this is a brilliant solar engineering hack. You are utilizing the thermal flywheel effect. During the day, the sun beats down on the stone wall of your cottage. The stone absorbs that heat. By sticking your wet fuel cakes directly to the stone, you are cooking them from both sides simultaneously. The sun bakes the outer crust, driving off the moisture into the air. The warm stone bakes the inner face, wicking the moisture out through the pores of the masonry. You work your way up the wall, creating rows of drying fuel. You are essentially tiling your house with energy. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that dung drying on house walls was a universal human technology found from the peasant cottages of medieval England, where they were called glaze or sizzles, to the rural villages of India and the plains of the American West. It wasn't a sign of squalor. It was a sign of security. A wall covered in drying dung meant the family inside would be warm that winter. An empty wall meant they were in trouble. You aren't looking at filth. You are looking at your bank account displayed in public. But perhaps you want to be a bit more civilized. You don't want to plaster your house. You want to mass-produce bricks. You move to a flat patch of hard-packed earth in the yard. You grab a wooden frame, a simple rectangle made of 4 slats of wood, maybe the size of a modern shoebox. You place the frame on the ground. You shovel the wet coal mixture into it. You stomp it down with your heel, packing it into the corners. Then you swiftly lift the frame. Schlock. A perfect rectangular brick of black fuel is left behind on the ground. You repeat this over and over, hundreds of times. You are turning your yard into a drying floor. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit, the goose walk. Once the bricks were laid out, they were vulnerable. Chickens, dogs, and children would run over them, ruining the shape. But geese were useful. In some regions, peasants would drive a flock of geese over the drying fuel. The geese's flat, webbed feet would gently tamp down the surface of the bricks without breaking them, compressing the top layer and making it more water-resistant. You are employing waterfowl as quality control inspectors. Now begins the waiting game. As the weeks pass, you watch your bricks change. They shrink. They turn from a glistening, wet black to a dull, dusty gray. They become lighter. You pick one up. It feels surprisingly light, almost like pumice. The water has evaporated, leaving behind a honeycomb of dried grass fibers, clay, and coal dust. You tap it with your knuckle. Tink, it rings. That is the sound of success. If it made a dull thud, it would still be wet inside. If it crumbled, you didn't use enough manure. But a tink means the binding agents have polymerized. You have created a synthetic rock. But this process isn't just about drying. It's about fermentation. Inside the brick, before it fully dries, the bacteria in the manure are still active. They consume the last bits of volatile organic matter. This curing process is crucial. If you burn fresh, dried dung, it smells like a barn fire. If you burn well-cured, aged coal, it burns with a neutral, slightly earthy scent, and importantly, it produces almost no smoke. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate, the invisible energy workforce. For a long time, economic historians calculated the energy consumption of the Middle Ages based solely on records of wood sales and coal taxes. They concluded that peasants must have been freezing because they couldn't afford enough wood. They ignored the non-market fuels, the peat, the gleanings, and the dung, because these things were never sold, only made at home. Modern scholars now argue that the invisible energy sector was massive, largely managed by women and children, and it was the only reason the European peasantry survived the Little Ice Age. You are part of a massive, unrecorded economy of scavengers. The sun is beginning to lose its strength. The days are getting shorter. The equinox gales are coming, the heavy storms of autumn. You have to get the fuel inside. You peel the dried cakes off the wall. See our crack. They pop off, leaving a clean circle on the stone. You gather the bricks from the yard. You stack them in the store. This might be a dry corner of the byre, or a special hollow under the floorboards, or a small shed. You stack them carefully, interlocking them like a dry stone wall. You count them. 500, 600. Is it enough? You do the mental math. You need 3 for the morning boost, 2 for the afternoon simmer, 4 for the night bank. That's 9 per day. Over a 120-day winter, you need over 1,000. You are short. Panic flutters in your chest. You have the peat. You have the coal balls. You have the kindling. But these are all maintenance fuels. They are good for keeping a fire going, but they lack the sheer thermal mass to fight a deep freeze. You need a mother log. You need a piece of wood so big, so dense, and so powerful that it acts as the anchor for the entire winter. You need a log that doesn't just burn for an hour, but for days. You need the nuclear option of the medieval hearth. You remember the massive bog oak you found, but even that isn't big enough for the holy days. You need a whole tree. You look toward the forest again. You know the laws. You know the risks. But the harvest is done. The Lord is distracted with his own feasting preparations, and you have a plan. You are going to engage in the ancient ritual of the Yule log. But this isn't the cute little cake you buy at the bakery. This is a monster. It is a tree trunk the size of a telephone pole, and you are going to drag it right into your living room. You stand at the edge of the forest, your breath misting in the freezing December air. The ground is hard as iron. The sun is a weak, pale disk hanging low in the sky, barely clearing the treetops. You aren't here for twigs. You aren't here for fallen branches. You are here for the Yule log. In modern Christmas traditions, a Yule log is a chocolate sponge cake rolled up with cream. Or perhaps it's a small, decorative piece of birchwood you throw on the fire for an hour while drinking eggnog. But for you, the Yule log is a piece of heavy industrial machinery. It is the thermal anchor of the 12 days of Christmas. It is a massive tree trunk, usually the root ball or the gnarled base of an oak or ash that is too knotty to split and too heavy to sell. You and your neighbors have been eyeing this particular fallen giant for months. It's an old oak that came down in the autumn storms. It is beastly. The trunk is as thick as a wine barrel. It still has its roots attached, caked in frozen mud. You wrap chains or heavy ropes around the base. You harness the ox, or perhaps just 10 strong men from the village. Heave. The log groans against the frozen earth. This isn't just firewood. It is a monolith. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that the Yule log, or Christmas block, was not meant to burn for an evening. It was designed to burn continuously for the entire 12 days of Christmas, from Christmas Eve to Epiphany, January 6th. It was the pilot light for the holiday season. If the log burned out before the 12 days were up, it was considered a terrible omen, a prediction of death or bad luck for the household in the coming year. You drag the monster back to the cottage. But there is a logistical problem. Your cottage is small. The log is 20 feet long. It physically won't fit inside the room. So you don't bring it all in. You open the door. You drag the root and the head of the log right into the hearth. The rest of the trunk, the body, trails across the floor, out the door, and into the yard. You are living with a tree in your house. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit, the trip hazard holiday. For the duration of the 12 days, the door of the cottage could not be fully closed because a giant tree trunk was sticking out of it. This meant the draft was terrible, hence the need for the snowbanking and the settle bench we discussed earlier. As the log burned down at the hearth end, you would physically shove the entire tree forward a few feet into the fire. It was a conveyor belt of fuel. You lived with a tripping hazard that was slowly being consumed by the flames. You maneuver the massive root ball into the back of the fireplace. This is the backstock. You don't light the log itself. You build a smaller fire against the log. The massive oak trunk acts as a reflector, bouncing heat into the room. Slowly, over hours, the face of the log begins to char. Then it begins to glow. It doesn't flame, it pulsates. A log of this size, once it catches, becomes a massive bed of coals that stands upright. It releases a steady, intense infrared heat that cooks you from 10 feet away. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate, the pagan persistence theory. Why do we do this? Historians have long argued that the Yule log is a direct survival of Germanic or Norse pagan solstice rituals. Yule, where bonfires were lit to call back the sun on the darkest days of the year. The church tried to ban it, then tried to baptize it, saying the ash represented the death of sin. But the persistence of the magic, associated with the log keeping the unburnt end under the bed to prevent lightning strikes, or spreading the ash on the fields for fertility, suggests that for the peasant, the theology didn't matter as much as the survival. The log was a god of warmth in a season of death. You sit before the glowing monster. The heat is incredible. It is the only time in the winter you will feel truly hot. But you can't just let it roar. If it burns too fast, it won't last the 12 days. You have to manage the rate of combustion. You have to become a draft engineer. You watch the smoke curl up the chimney. If the fire is drawing too much air, the log will burn white hot and consume itself in a day. You need to throttle it down. You grab a handful of the damp peat ash from yesterday's fire. You sprinkle it over the top of the burning log. You are damping down the fire. You are choking the oxygen supply just enough to keep the reaction in the yet smoldering phase rather than the flaming phase. You are tuning your heater. And as you sit there, you notice something else. The log isn't just heating the room. It is changing the light. A wood fire flickers yellow and orange, but a massive, glowing oak coal burns deep red. The room is bathed in a bloody crimson twilight. It is a primal, womb-like atmosphere, but there is a danger to the Yule log that you might not expect. You hear a pop, a loud crack, like a gunshot. A spark, a piece of superheated sap or trapped steam, explodes out of the log. It flies across the room and lands on the rush matting. You jump up and stomp it out. The Yule log is full of knots and pockets of resin. It is artillery. You cannot leave it unattended. Someone must always be watching the fire. This is the origin of the fire watch. You take turns sleeping. The fire is a guest that requires a babysitter. But you have the log. You have the heat. The core of your winter survival system is in place. However, the Yule log only lasts 12 days. What happens on January 7th? What happens when the monster is gone and you are back to your small, miserly pile of peat and comb balls? You need a technique to make a small fire act like a big one. You need to learn the art of banking. You need to learn how to put the fire to sleep without killing it. You look at the pile of gray ash accumulating around the base of the log. To a modern person, ash is trash. To you, it is a tool. It is an insulating blanket for your coals. You are about to perform the nightly ritual that defines your existence. You are about to bank the fire. The Yule log has done its job for the holiday, or perhaps it is just a regular Tuesday in February, and you are staring at your modest fire of peat and cone balls. The day is done. The shadows are long. Your family is already climbing into the box bed, the biothermal pile, forming for the night. It is time to sleep, but you cannot just walk away from the fire. If you leave it burning, two things will happen. 1. You will waste precious fuel while everyone is asleep. 2. The fire might spit a spark onto the rush floor and burn the house down while you dream. But if you pour water on it, the Hollywood dousing the campfire move, you commit the sin we discussed in Section 1. You kill the heat. You wake up to a frozen house and the misery of striking a flint. You need the fire to survive, but you need it to stop burning. You need to put the fire into suspended animation. You are about to perform the art of banking. You grab your curfew shovel or a simple iron scraper. You don't add wood. Instead, you gently rake the glowing coals together in the center of the hearth. You consolidate the thermal mass. You want them touching, sharing their heat like penguins in a blizzard. Then you take the gray, feathery ash that has accumulated at the edges of the fireplace. To a modern eye, ash is garbage. To you, it is an advanced ceramic insulator. You shovel the ash over the coals. You bury them completely. You build a smooth, gray mound in the center of the hearth. It looks like a grave, and in a way, it is. You are burying the fire alive. The physics here is delicate. By covering the coals with ash, you are cutting off the oxygen supply almost entirely. Without oxygen, the combustion reaction slows down to a crawl. But the ash is also a phenomenal insulator. It traps the heat inside the mound. Inside that gray hill, the coals remain red-hot, smoldering at a microscopic rate. They are slumbering. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that a well-banked fire can stay hot for 12 to 18 hours without adding fuel. This was the primary way people managed fire for thousands of years. You didn't light a fire every morning. You woke up the fire you lit last November. There are documented cases in the Highlands of Scotland and rural Ireland where a family's hearth fire was kept alive continuously, never fully extinguished, for over 100 years. The fire was an heirloom, passed from generation to generation. You pack down the ash with the back of the shovel. You are checking for leaks. If you see a wisp of smoke or a glow of red, you add more ash. You want a perfect seal. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit, the smowering prayers. In the Gaelic traditions of Scotland, banking the fire, called smowering or smullet, was a sacred ritual performed by the woman of the house. She wouldn't just shovel ash. She would recite a prayer, asking God and the saints to protect the house while the fire slept. One translation goes, "I save this fire as Christ saves all. Safe be the house, safe be the herd, safe be the dear children." The banking of the fire was the moment the house closed its eyes. It was a spiritual security system. You stand up. The light in the room is gone. The cheerful, flickering orange illumination has been replaced by total darkness. The heat output drops instantly, but the mound radiates a very gentle, low-level warmth, just enough to keep the chimney draft working so the smoke doesn't backfill into the room. You have successfully paused the chemical reaction. But banking isn't just about preservation. It's about safety. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate, the curfew control. The word curfew comes from the old French couvre-feu, meaning cover fire. We think of curfew as a time when teenagers have to be home. But in medieval cities, the curfew bell was a public safety alarm. When the bell rang, usually at 8 o'clock or 9 p.m., it was a legal requirement to bank your fire. Why? Because medieval cities were made of wood and thatch. If one person left a roaring fire unattended and a log rolled out, the whole city burned. Historians argue that the curfew wasn't just about fire. It was about social control. By forcing people to dim their lights and kill their heat, the authorities forced them to go to bed. It stopped late-night drinking, plotting, and working. The banked fire was the symbol of an obedient citizen. You walk toward the bed in the dark. You know the way by heart 3 steps past the settle. Avoid the dog. Turn left at the cow. You climb into the box bed. You are cold, but you are calm. You know that under that gray, you wake up. The darkness is absolute. It presses against your eyes, heavy and suffocating. You are disoriented. You are warm in the box bed, buried under the quilt and the limbs of your family, but your mind is racing. Is it 2 a.m.? Is it 5 a.m.? Is the sun about to rise? Or did you just close your eyes for 10 minutes? In the modern world, this moment is solved by a glance at a glowing phone screen or the red digits of an alarm clock. But here, time is invisible in the dark. You are adrift in the void of the night. Knowing the time isn't just curiosity. It's economic necessity. If you get up too early, you burn precious rushlights and oil for no reason, wasting money. If you get up too late, the cow, who has a very strict internal clock, will be in pain and might kick you when you try to milk her. You need to hit the target. You listen. You can't hear the church bell from inside the insulated box bed. You can't see the window. But if you are wealthy, or perhaps just a very anxious peasant, you might have a device burning on a shelf nearby. A device that turns wax into hours. You are looking at the candle clock. A candle is a calibrated fuel cell. If you make your candles standard, same thickness, same wick, same fat, they will burn at a consistent rate. A standard tallow candle might burn 1 inch every 20 minutes. You peek through the slats of the bed. There is a faint, sputtering blue light. You left a watch candle burning. It has marks painted on the side rings of black soot or notches carved into the wax. You count the rings. 3 rings gone. That means 3 hours have passed since you went to bed. It is roughly 1 a.m. You can go back to sleep. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that King Alfred the Great, 9th century, is credited with inventing the precision candle clock. He needed to organize his day between prayer, administration, and warfare, regardless of the sun. He commissioned candles that were exactly 12 inches long, marked at 1-inch intervals. Each inch burned for 20 minutes. 6 candles burned for exactly 24 hours. To stop drafts from making them burn unevenly, the wind variable, he enclosed them in cases made of transparent horn, inventing the first true lantern clock. He was the first man in England to carry standard time in his pocket. But you don't have King Alfred's beeswax. You have tallow. You smell it before you see it. Tallow is rendered animal fat mutton or beef. It burns yellow, smoky, and stinks of frying meat. And it is soft. In a warm room, a tallow candle can droop or melt too fast. Your clock is temperature sensitive. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit. The pin and plate alarm. You might wonder how you wake up at a specific time without a phone alarm. You can hack your candle clock. You stick a small metal pin or nail into the wax at the 6 a.m. mark. You place the candle on a metal plate. When the wax melts down to that mark, the pin loses its grip and falls. Clink. The sound of the metal hitting the plate wakes you up. You have built a gravity-powered, combustion-driven alarm clock. But for you, the peasant, burning a candle all night is a waste. You usually rely on the log itself. You know your fuel. You know that a peat brick lasts 2 hours. You know that the banking mound you built last night will hold heat for 12. You put your hand against the wooden panel of the box bed. It is still warm. That means the banking is holding. If it were cold, you would know you overslept and the fire is dead. You are reading the temperature gradient as a clock. However, this reliance on process time, it takes this long to burn a log, or this long to say a paternoster, creates a conflict with the outside world. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate: church time versus Merchant time. Historian Jacques Le Goff argued that the Middle Ages saw a war between two types of time. Church time was fluid. It was based on the sun and the canonical hours, matins, lauds, vespers. An hour in the summer was longer than an hour in the winter, because the day was divided into 12 parts, regardless of sunlight. Merchant time was rigid. Merchants needed to know exactly how long labor took, regardless of the season. They needed 60-minute hours. The invention of the mechanical clock in the 13th century was the victory of the merchant. But you, in your cottage, are still living on church time, or rather, fire time. Your day is measured by how much fuel you have burned. There is another way to use a candle for time, but it's high stakes. Imagine you are at an auction. You are bidding on a plot of land or a cow. The auctioneer doesn't say, "Going once, going twice." He lights a tiny inch of candle. He shouts, "Bidding is open." The candle flickers. You lie in the dark, listening to the rhythmic breathing of your family and the occasional pop from the banked fire. The air in the cottage is thick. It tastes of oak, peat, and a savory, salty tongue that makes your stomach rumble even though it's 3 a.m. You sniff the air again. It smells delicious. It smells like breakfast. You realize that you are sleeping inside a giant appliance. Your house isn't just a dormitory. It is a walk-in smoker. You look up into the gloom of the rafters. You can't see them, but you know they are there. Hanging from the beams, shrouded in the smoke cloud, are the winter stores. Legs of pork, strings of sausages, perhaps a side of venison, if you poached it successfully, and baskets of onions. They are bathing in the fumes of your Yule log. In the modern world, we pay a premium for hickory smoked ham or applewood smoked bacon. We view smoke as a flavor profile, a culinary luxury. But for you, smoke is a chemical weapon against death. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that wood smoke is a complex cocktail of over 400 chemical compounds, including phenols, acids, and formaldehyde. When these chemicals hit the surface of raw meat, they do three things. They lower the pH, making it acidic and hostile to bacteria. They act as an antioxidant, preventing the fat from going rancid. And they form a physical pellicle, or skin, that seals the meat against insects. You aren't just flavoring your ham. You are varnishing it with natural preservatives. If you didn't have a smoky house, that meat would rot in weeks. With the smoke, it will last until Easter. The inefficiency of your chimney, the fact that it leaks smoke into the room, is the only reason. You have protein in March. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit: the turpentine ham disaster. Not all smoke is created equal. You have to be extremely careful what you burn. Hardwoods like oak, beech, and ash create the delicious preserving smoke we love. But if you burn softwoods like pine, spruce, or fir, the resin in the wood vaporizes into turpentine and creosote. If you hang your ham over a pine fire, the meat will taste like floor varnish and coat your throat with black, bitter soot. A pine ham is inedible. So the fuel you gathered back in Section 2 determines not just your warmth, but the taste of your dinner for the next 6 months. You roll over, trying to ignore the hunger. The smoke stings your eyes a little even in your sleep. You have smoker's lungs without ever touching a cigarette. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate: the chimney health paradox. When chimneys became common in the 16th and 17th centuries, they were hailed as a massive leap forward in public health. They sucked the smoke out of the room, saving people's eyes and lungs. But some historians argue there was a hidden cost. When the smoke left the room, the passive preservation stopped. Meat started to spoil faster. The poor, who couldn't afford separate smokehouses, lost a vital method of food storage. They had to rely more on salt, which was expensive, or drying. The clean air movement might have accidentally increased food poisoning rates among the peasantry. You are living in the golden age of smoked meat, simply because you have terrible ventilation. But the smoke isn't just for meat. It preserves the house itself. We mentioned earlier that the thatch is smoke-hardened. The same phenols that cure the bacon also cure the straw roof and the wooden beams. The smoke kills the death watch beetle larvae that bore into the oak. It kills the mold spores that rot the thatch. Your house is essentially a piece of taxidermy. You are pickling the structure from the inside out. However, there is a limit to how much smoke you can tolerate. The banked fire is producing a low, steady trickle. But what if you want heat? When you rake open the ashes in the morning, you want the log to flare up. You want radiant energy. But a log sitting flat on the hearth floor is lazy. It only burns on the top. The bottom is smothered against the cold stone. The air can't get underneath it to feed the combustion. You need to lift the log. You need to introduce the concept of underside draft. You need a piece of technology that is half tool, half sculpture. You need the fire dog. The sun is up, or at least. The gray smear of light in the east suggests it is morning. You have successfully woken the fire from its ash slumber. You raked back the gray blanket, found the glowing heart, and fed it a few kindling sticks. But now you want real heat. You want to cook breakfast. You want to warm the room. If you just throw your logs flat on the hearthstone, they will burn, but lazily. The bottom of the log, pressed against the cold stone and its own ash, gets no oxygen. It turns into black charcoal, but refuses to flame. The fire struggles to breathe. You need to elevate the conversation. You need to put your fuel on a pedestal. You reach for two heavy, blackened iron brackets standing in the corner. They look like horizontal bars with feet, and often upright posts at the front that are shaped like the heads of animals. These are your fire dogs, or endirons. You place them in the hearth, parallel to each other. You lift your heavy logs, perhaps, even the remains of the Yule log, and rest them across the iron bars. Instantly, the physics of the fire changes. By lifting the wood just 4 inches off the ground, you have created a draft tunnel underneath the fuel. Cold, oxygen-rich air is drawn in from the room, flows under the logs, and is sucked up into the heart of the fire. You have turned your passive pile of wood into a turbocharged engine. The flames roar to life, curling around the entire circumference of the log, not just the top. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that andirons, from the Old French andir, were one of the first things a new couple bought when setting up a household. They were often more expensive than the pots and pans. In a world without central heating, the efficiency of your fire determined your quality of life. A good pair of fire dogs could increase the thermal output of your wood by 30% simply by improving the airflow. They were the catalytic converters of the medieval world. You watch the fire brighten. The heat radiating from the lifted logs hits your shins. It feels aggressive. But looking at the iron uprights, you notice they are shaped like heads. Dogs, usually. Sometimes dragons or stags. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate. The guardian of the hearth theory. Why call them dogs? Etymologists and folklorists argue about this constantly. The practical theory is that they guard the logs, stopping them from rolling out onto the floor. The mythological theory is deeper. In Celtic and Germanic folklore, dogs were the guardians of the gateway to the underworld, the hearth being a gateway to the fire world. By placing iron dogs in the fire, you are symbolically placing spiritual guardians to watch over the most dangerous thing in your house. You weren't just holding up wood, you were chaining the beast. But the fire dogs serve another purpose. You look at the hooks welded onto the front of the uprights. These hooks are for holding a horizontal iron rod a spit. If you are wealthy enough to have meat that isn't preserved ham, you skew it on the spit and rest it on the dogs. The fire cooks the meat, but you have to turn it. If you stop turning, one side burns and the other stays raw. You could turn it by hand, scorching your eyebrows for 2 hours. Or you could employ the saddest piece of technology in history. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit, the turnspit dog, Canis vertigus. This was a specific breed of dog, genetically engineered by medieval and early modern breeders to have a long body and short, crooked legs like a depressing corgi. Its sole purpose in life was to run inside a wooden wheel, like a hamster wheel, which was mounted on the wall and connected to the spit by a pulley. As the dog ran, the meat turned. These dogs were kitchen appliances. On Sundays, they were often taken to church to be used as foot warmers, where they would famously start running in place if the priest mentioned heavens or turning in his sermon. They are now extinct, replaced by clockwork jacks. You, the peasant, probably don't have a turnspit dog. You have a child. You yell at your youngest to turn the spit. The fire roars on the dogs all day. The logs burn clean and hot. The smoke flows smoothly up the chimney, mostly. But as the day ends, the mood in the village changes. The sun sets, the work stops. And then a sound cuts through the twilight air. A deep, resonant tolling from the church tower. Bong, bong, bong. It isn't a call to prayer. It is a command. It is the law. The sound tells you that the fire time is over. It tells you that to keep your fire burning openly is now a crime. You drop your tools. You rush to the hearth. You are about to obey the curfew bell. You are standing by the hearth, perhaps warming your backside, or watching the last of the spit-roasted meat drip onto the coals. The fire dogs are doing their job, holding the logs up in a cheerful, roaring blaze. The room is bright. The shadows are pushed back into the corners. And then it happens. From the stone tower of the parish church in the center of the village, a single iron tongue strikes a bronze lip. Clang. It resonates through the valley. It cuts through the wind. Clang. It is the curfew bell. In the modern world, a bell is just a sound. Maybe it means church is starting or school is out. But in the medieval world, this sound is an executive order. It is the voice of the king and the mayor ringing in your ears. It is 8 p.m. or dusk, depending on the season, and the day is legally over. You have to move fast. If the village wakeman or the beadle walks past your cottage in 20 minutes and sees the orange flicker of flames through the cracks in your shutters, or sees smoke billowing happily from your chimney, you will be fined. And you don't have the money to pay the fine. You grab the heavy iron tongs. You reach into the fire, which is at its peak heat, and knock the logs off the fire dogs. Crash. The burning wood hits the stone hearth. Sparks fly everywhere. It feels like a crime. You are destroying the beautiful engine you spent all day building. You pull the hot, heavy iron dogs out of the fire zone, setting them aside to cool. They tick and ping as the metal contracts. Now, the fire is flat again. But it's still flaming. You can't leave it like this. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that William the Conqueror is often credited, or blamed, for strictly enforcing the curfew law across England starting in 1068. The term comes from the old French couvre-feu, cover fire, while the stated reason was fire safety, preventing the wooden cities from burning down. The Saxon peasants hated it because they believed it was a tool of oppression. By forcing everyone to douse their lights in fires at 8 p.m., William prevented the conquered English from gathering in taverns to plot rebellions. The bell was a disperser. It sent everyone to their lonely beds, cold and isolated. You grab your shovel. You start the banking process again, piling the ash over the scattered logs. But sometimes, just ash isn't enough, especially if the logs are big. You need a piece of specialized hardware to prove your compliance. You reach for a strange object sitting by the hearth. It looks like a large metal or ceramic dome, shaped a bit like a quarter wheel of cheese or a bell jar. It has a handle on top and small ventilation holes on the sides. This is the curfew cover, or couvre-feu. You place this lid directly over the pile of burning coals. Clunk. It fits largely against the back wall of the hearth, enclosing the fire completely. It acts as a snuffer. It doesn't put the fire out. The vent holes allow just enough oxygen to keep the embers alive, but it hides the light. It blocks the glare. It creates a safety cage around the heat source so that if a log rolls, it hits the inside of the metal dome instead of rolling onto the floor. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit, the Dutch oven ancestor. Culinary historians trace the lineage of the modern Dutch oven back to these curfew covers. Some clever peasants realized that if you placed a curfew cover over a hot bed of coals, the heat was trapped inside the dome. If you slipped a pot of dough or stew under the cover before you went to bed, the residual heat of the dying fire would slow cook the food overnight. The fire lid became a slow cooker. You are putting your fire to bed, but you are also baking tomorrow's bread. You step back. The room plunges into darkness. The cheerful, dancing light is gone, replaced by the smell of disturbed ash and the faint metallic tang of the hot iron cover. Outside, the bell stops ringing. The silence that follows is heavy. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate, the soundscape of authority. Historian Elling Corbin wrote extensively about village bells. In a world without mass media, the bell was the only mass communication system. It defined the territorial boundary of the community. The parish was defined by how far the bell could be heard. It defined the workday. It defined danger, the tocsin alarm. Scholars argue that the medieval person lived in an auditory landscape where they were constantly being yelled at by bells. The curfew bell wasn't just a time check. It was a psychological trigger that induced anxiety and obedience. You didn't go to sleep because you were tired. You went to sleep because the metal voice told you to. You fumble in the dark, moving toward the ladder to the loft or the box bed. You are technically abed, but are you asleep? This is the great secret of the medieval night. The curfew sends you to bed at 8 p.m., but human beings don't typically sleep for 12 hours straight. You wake up. It feels like hours have passed. It is pitch black. The house is silent. You are wide awake. You are entering the watch, or, as historians call it, the first waking. You don't panic. You don't reach for a sleeping pill. You accept this as normal. You sit up in the dark. You talk to your spouse. You pray. You maybe even do some quiet work, like spinning wool or shelling peas by touch. You are living in the era of segmented sleep. You lie there, listening to the wind, waiting for the second sleep to come. But as you drift off again, your mind lingers on the fire under that metal cover. Is it still alive? The ash is a good insulator. The cover is a good shield. But fire is a fickle creature. It eats fuel, If it runs out of food under that dome, it will starve. If it gets too much air, it will burn out. You have a moment of panic. The morning resurrection depends entirely on the chemistry happening under that lid right now. If you lift the lid tomorrow and find cold gray dust, your day is ruined. You will have to do the walk of shame to the neighbors. You pray to Saint Anthony, patron saint of fire. You trust the process. You close your eyes. The second sleep takes you. The light returns. It is gray, cold. You stand shivering in your linen shift, the cold mud floor sucking the heat out of your bare feet. It is the wolf hour of the morning, that gray, lifeless time before the sun has truly broken the horizon. The house is silent, save for the sleepy chewing of the cow in the byre. You look at the hearth. The curfew cover, if you used one, sits there like a cold iron bell. If you didn't use a cover, you are looking at a mound of gray, dusty ash that looks indistinguishable from the floor. To the untrained eye, the fire is dead. To you, it is a Schringer's cat situation. It is both alive and dead until you dig. You grab the raking iron, or just a sturdy stick. You kneel on the cold stones. You say a quick, silent prayer to Saint Bridget, the keeper of the eternal flame. You lift the cover. Clang. Nothing but gray dust. No smoke. No heat. Panic flares in your chest. If this fire is out, your morning just got an hour longer and infinitely more miserable. You will have to get the flint and steel, or worse, run to the neighbors. But you know the trick. You don't dig randomly. You dig in the center, where the heat was most concentrated. You gently scrape away the top layer of white, feathery ash. You go deeper into the darker, coarser grit, and then you see it. A faint, dull, dark red glow. It isn't a flame. It isn't even a fire. It is a single surviving cherry, a piece of peat or bog oak that has refused to surrender its energy to the cold. It is barely the size of a walnut, but it is alive. You let out a breath you didn't know you were holding. Now you have to perform CPR. You don't throw a log on it. That would crush it and smother it. You have to feed it something so delicate, so dry, and so combustible that it catches instantly. You reach into a dry nook in the wall near the chimney. You pull out your tinder. This might be dried moss, charred linen, called charcloth, or very fine wood shavings. You sprinkle a pinch of tinder onto the cherry. You lean down, putting your face inches from the dust. You pucker your lips. Hoo-oo. You blow, gently, a long, steady stream of oxygen. The cherry brightens. It turns from dull red to bright orange. The tinder smokes, curls, and then snap a tiny yellow flame jumps into existence. You feed it small twigs, then larger sticks, then a peat brick. Within 10 minutes, the hearth is roaring again. You have successfully bridged the night. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that the tinderbox was the most essential survival kit in human history until the 19th century. If your hearth did die, you had to rely on this box. It contained a piece of high-carbon steel, the striker, a sharp piece of flint, and the tinder itself. Striking a spark was a violent physical act. You had to bash the steel against the stone to shave off microscopic particles of metal, which would spontaneously ignite due to friction, pyrophoricity, and land on the charcloth. It was not easy. It required dry hands and skill. If your tinder was damp, which, in a medieval cottage, it often was, you were out of luck. But what if you had to leave the house? What if you were a shepherd going out to the field, and you wanted to bring the fire with you? This brings us to a quirky, fringe tidbit: the fire mushroom. Medieval people didn't just use wood for tinder. They used fungus. Specifically, the Fomes fomentarius, hoof fungus, or Inonotus obliquus, chaga. When processed boiled in urine or lye and pounded flat, this fungus turns into a material called amadou. Amadou is miraculous. It catches a spark instantly and smolders slowly like incense. You could light a chunk of Amadou, put it in a hollow horn or a metal cage with holes, and carry it in your pocket all day. It wouldn't flame, but it would stay hot. You were walking around with a live ember in your pocket, ready to start a fire anywhere. It was a prehistoric Zippo. You stand up, brushing the ash from your knees. The fire is crackling now, boiling the water for your morning pottage. The room is warming up. The cow is stirring. The cycle begins again. But looking at the fire, you realize that the person kneeling in the ash is almost always the same person. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate, the gender of the flame. Anthropologists and historians have long analyzed the division of labor in the household. In many medieval cultures, the hearth was the exclusive domain of women. The woman was the keeper of the flame. This sounds poetic, but it was also a shackle. It meant she could never. You step away from the smoky, ash-strewn hearth of the Middle Ages. You blink, and suddenly you are back in the 21st century. The air is clean, albeit dry from the forced air heating. The floor is carpet, not rushes. The light comes from an LED bulb, not a piece of boiled cow horn. But you feel a phantom itch, a longing. You miss the fire, not the cold, or the smoke in your eyes, or the fear of freezing to death, but the presence of it. You miss the infinity log. You miss the feeling of having a contained, glowing sun in your living room that demands nothing but patience. You want to recreate the experience, but you live in the suburbs. You can't dig up your neighbor's lawn looking for peat. You definitely cannot mix cow manure in your kitchen, unless you want to be evicted. But you can still build a medieval-style slow burner. You just need to swap the ingredients for their modern industrial equivalents. You are about to make the sawdust log. You need two things, cellulose and hydrocarbons. In the medieval version, cellulose was straw or peat fibers. Today, it is sawdust. You can get this for free from any lumberyard, or buy a bag of animal bedding, wood shavings from a pet store. This is your slack. In the medieval version, the hydrocarbon binder was manure and the enzymes within it. Today, we have something far more potent, paraffin wax. Go to your junk drawer. Find those half-burned scented candles, the broken crayons, the tea lights that burned out halfway. This is your fuel source. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that paraffin wax is essentially solid gasoline. It is a byproduct of petroleum refining. Its energy density is staggering roughly 42 megajoules per kilogram. That is nearly double the energy density of dried wood or peat, and significantly higher than coal. When you look at an old candle, you are looking at a stick of dynamite that burns in slow motion. Here is the recipe for the modern Yule log. The melt. Take an old pot, one you never want to cook food in again, and melt down your scavenged wax. It will turn into a clear, hot liquid that smells confusingly of vanilla bean and ocean breeze. The mix. Stir in the sawdust. You want a consistency like thick, dry oatmeal. You want the wood fibers to be fully saturated with the wax, but you want enough wood to provide structure. The mold. Pour this hot, sticky sludge into a mold. A cardboard milk carton works perfectly. Or, for smaller pucks, use the cups of a cardboard egg carton. The wick. While it's still soft, stick a piece of natural twine or a twisted strip of cardboard into the center. Let it cool. It will harden into a solid, heavy brick. When you light this brick, something magical happens. A sawdust acts as thousands of tiny wicks. It draws the liquid wax up to the flame. Because the fuel is so dense, and the oxygen supply is limited by the wax matrix, it doesn't flare up like a pile of loose shavings. It burns with a steady, stubborn, unkillable flame. A single mill carton log can burn for 3 or 4 hours. You have successfully recreated the comb ball using industrial waste. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit: the buddy burner. This technology was perfected not by scientists, but by hobos, migrant workers, during the Great Depression. They would take a tuna can, coil a strip of corrugated cardboard inside it, and pour melted wax over the whole thing. This created a pocket-sized stove that could boil water or fry an egg in a boxcar. It was the ultimate Depression-era pocket hearth. You are tapping into a lineage of survival engineering that stretches from the medieval peasant to the riding-the-rails drifter. But why do we do this? Why, in a world of smart thermostats and heated blankets, do we feel the need to make messy, dangerous fire bricks? This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate: the ancestral memory hypothesis. Evolutionary psychologists argue that our attraction to fire is genetic. For 1,000,000 years, the hearth was the center of safety, food, and socialization. The specific flickering frequency of a fire triggers a relaxation response in the human brain, lowering blood pressure. Some scholars argue that fire gazing was the original form of meditation. When we stare at a fire, we are rebooting our brains to factory settings. We aren't just liking it, we are neurologically dependent on it. You place your modern log in the fireplace, or fire pit. You light the wick, it catches. The flame spreads across the top of the sawdust brick. It settles into a low, golden roar. You sit back. You turn off the electric lights. The room fills with that same primal dancing shadow that your medieval counterpart saw. The smell is different. It smells of pine shavings and maybe a hint of old lavender candle, but the feeling is the same. The heat is radiant. It hits your face and shins. You watch the log. It doesn't pop. It doesn't spark. It just burns. It is a steady companion in the dark. You realize that for all our technology, we haven't really improved on the concept of trapped sunlight. We've just found new ways to package it. The log burns on. An hour passes. 2 hours. You feel your eyelids getting heavy. The fire trance is setting in. The flicker rate is synchronizing with your alpha waves. You are safe. You are warm. You have mastered the night. But as you stare into the flame, you realize there is one final evolution of the fire. One that doesn't require wax or wood or even heat. You pull out your phone. You open an app. You search for 10-hour Yule log video. You are about to confront the eternal flame. You are about to ask the final question: is a digital fire real? And does it count if it warms your soul but leaves your feet cold? You blow out the candle on your makeshift sawdust log. The room plunges into darkness, illuminated only by the cold blue glow of a screen. You aren't staring at a hearth. You are staring at a 4,000-old display. You have navigated to Netflix or YouTube and selected Fireplace for your home, Birchwood Edition. You press play. Instantly, a high-definition fire roars to life. The logs crackle with a crisp, recorded sound. The flames lick the screen in a perfect, seamless loop. You are engaging in the strangest ritual of the modern age. You are warming yourself with a hallucination. To a medieval peasant, this would be witchcraft. A fire that gives no heat? A fire that consumes no wood? A fire that you can pause? It defies the laws of physics, and yet you feel it. As you watch the digital flames dance, your shoulders drop. Your breathing slows. You feel a phantom warmth in your chest. You are experiencing the digital placebo effect. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that the broadcast Yule log is older than the internet. It began on Christmas Eve, 1966, on WPIX Channel 11 in New York City. The station manager wanted to give his employees the night off, so he canceled all programming and simply broadcast a continuous 17-second loop of a fireplace at Gracie Mansion, accompanied by easy listening Christmas music. He thought it would be a disaster. Instead, it was a sensation. It became the highest-rated program in the time slot. People in high-rise apartments with no fireplaces sat around their boxy TV sets and stared at the cathode ray tube as if it were a holy shrine. It was the first time technology successfully mimicked the soul of the hearth. But there is a flaw in the illusion. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit: the rug spark scandal. The original 1966 WPIX footage was actually a loop of just 17 seconds because the filming went wrong. During the shoot, a spark flew out of the fire and burned the antique rug in the mayor's mansion. The crew was kicked out immediately. They had to construct the entire broadcast from that one short clip of safe fire before the disaster happened. So for decades, millions of New Yorkers were relaxing to a fire that was technically a crime scene recording of property damage. You watch the video. It never burns down. The logs never turn to ash. You never have to bank it. You never have to mix manure or dig peat. It is the sanitized, sterilized, risk-free version of the medieval struggle. But does it count? This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate: the simulacra versus biophilia argument. Sociologists like Jean Baudrillard would argue that the digital fire is a simulacrum, a copy with no original, a fake experience that replaces reality. We prefer the TV fire because it's clean and safe, effectively severing our connection to nature. However, evolutionary psychologists argue for biophilia. They say our brains are hardwired to respond to the visual stimulus of flickering light in the red-orange spectrum. A 2014 study showed that watching a video of a fire, even without sound, significantly lowered blood pressure in subjects. Your lizard brain doesn't know it's a TV. It just sees fire and releases the safe, warm social hormones. You are hacking your own biology. You pull your duvet tighter. The screen casts dancing shadows on your bedroom wall. You think back to the peasant in the snow-banked cottage. You think of the smoke stinging their eyes, the smell of curing ham, the heat of the cow, the rough wool of the nightcap. Their life was hard. It was a constant battle against entropy. Every calorie of heat was bought with sweat. But they had something you don't. They had the center. The hearth was the anchor of the home. It was the focus. The Latin word focus literally means hearth. It was where stories were told. It was where the elders sat in the inglenook and the children played on the rush matting. It was the original television, but the content wasn't broadcast from Hollywood. It was broadcast from the family. When we replaced the hearth with the radiator, we gained comfort, but we lost the focal point. We scattered to separate rooms. We stopped looking at the same light. The Yule log video is our attempt to get it back. We are trying to digitally reconstruct the communal soul of the tribe. You watch the loop restart. The same log cracks in the same place. You realize that you and a medieval peasant are not so different. You are both huddled in the dark, waiting for the sun to return. You are both using technology, theirs of mud and iron, yours of silicon and pixels to push back the cold. You are both afraid of the dark, and you both find comfort in the light. The fire is the oldest story we know. It is the story of survival. It is the story of how we stole a piece of the sun and brought it inside so we wouldn't have to be alone in the night. You reach out and turn down the brightness of the screen. The orange glow softens. You are warm. The thermostat is holding at 70 degrees. The wind outside is just a sound effect, muffled by double-paned glass. You have survived the winter. You have banked your fire. And so, the digital flame flickers on, a silent guardian in the corner of the room. The loop is seamless, a river of light that flows without beginning or end. Let the image of the fire soften in your mind. You don't need to watch it anymore. You can feel it. Imagine you are back in the inglenook, but the stone is perfectly contoured to your back. The heat is gentle, radiating through the layers of wool and linen, penetrating deep into your muscles. The work is done. The peat is stacked high in the rickle, dry and whistling in the wind. The coal balls are baked hard on the wall. The Yule log is slumbering under its blanket of gray ash, hiding its cherry-red heart safe until morning. The cow is asleep in the byre, her breathing slow and heavy, a warm presence in the dark. The smell of smoke and dried herbs hangs in the air, grounding you, protecting you. There are no more drafts. The snow